This is Gag Rule Live. And after this, so as you could see, we have today a guest, all of you familiar. He's well known around. He's a writer, he's a journalist, and he publishes every week. And he spent whole week, day and night, one article. Imagine how much time and effort he put in to make that article be 100%. So, Mr. Sassounian, welcome to gagrule.net.
Thank you. It's my honor.
So today our topic is this U.S. appeal court makes a wrong decision on Armenian demand, says Mr. Sassounian. So what is happening? Why is the wrong decision? What happened there?
Well, to give a little background so people can understand, because this is a very highly specialized subject, and you need to be an international lawyer to understand these things. So I'll make it very simple to non-lawyers, and I'm a non-lawyer myself. I've spent many years educating myself on this subject. So in the United States, if you commit a crime, there's something called a statute of limitation. That means that the government cannot charge you if several years have passed. And if somebody does to you bad, you cannot sue them 10, 20 years later. There are some exceptions. One of them is murder, for example. But in general, most crimes, there's a few year limit after which you cannot charge people. So Armenians, of course, they didn't charge anybody for almost 100 years. And so they thought of a solution to bypass the statute of limitation. So they went to the California legislature, state assembly and state senate, and passed a bill that says that because it was genocide, and genocide has no statute of limitation, has no time limit, anybody who wants to bring a lawsuit that's genocide related has to do it between 2010, but no later than 2016. So they had 6 years to do this. And this law, I think, was passed in 2006. So Armenian lawyers, a few of them, start filing lawsuits, various lawsuits against insurance companies, New York Life in New York, and also AXA, which is in Europe, France. And we were sort of lucky because both of these lawsuits ended up out of court settlement. That means that it was settled out of court. The insurance companies agreed to pay the money to those who had life insurance during the genocide. So the New York Life was $20 million, and AXA was, I think, $18 million. That people who got insurance got paid, and some money went to lawyers for expenses, and some money went to several Armenian organizations. So that's the background. So now Armenians could file lawsuits on genocide related, even though the statute of limitation had passed more than 3-5 years. It has passed almost 90 years. So several lawsuits were filed, as I mentioned, the insurance ones, but another one was the Incirlik, which is in Turkey, and it used to be an old Armenian land, a town, and Incir in Turkish means fig. There were a lot of figs in that area. It was a garden, and planting figs. And Incirlik, since 1950s, is a NATO Air Force base that Turks make money by leasing it, renting it to the U.S. and NATO. And so several people who owned lands in Incirlik, their parents or grandparents, they filed a lawsuit. In fact, we end up having two lawsuits. One was filed by Bartes Deryayan, who passed away a couple of years ago, and then the other one was filed by Mark Geragos. And both of these lawyers have their lawyers, their partners. So they filed their lawsuit, and the lawsuit was, they also filed other lawsuits against German banks that had money by the victims of the genocide who opened accounts in Germany and put their money there. But when they died, the Germans never gave the money to their heirs. So these lawsuits have been going on for years, and because they're not criminal lawsuits, it takes years. It doesn't have priority. So in 2012, a federal judge, her last name is G, she decided that the California law was unconstitutional or anti-constitutional because it interfered in the conduct of foreign policy. It had to do with foreign affairs. You know, Turkey is a foreign country, and they said that that's the domain of the executive branch or the president, and not up to a state to interfere. States cannot decide foreign policy; only the federal government can. So the judge struck down the law on which the lawsuit was based, but Armenians persevered, and it went to these two lawsuits went to federal judge, and another federal judge ruled that these lawsuits cannot go forward again on the basis of the fact that a state was interfering in the affairs of the federal government, foreign policy. So the Armenian lawyers for both lawsuits, they appealed to a panel of federal judges. It's the Circuit Court of Appeals, Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So we've been waiting for a while for their decision. So finally, last week on August 8th, the Circuit Court made a decision, and it was a very strange decision they made. You can tell that the judges, all the other judges also, and I've attended some of the court cases in federal court, they're very reluctant to take a position on a lawsuit. They're worried, they're scared or something, that they don't want to make a clear-cut decision on these lawsuits, leaving such foreign policy matters to the president, executive branch. But they are wrong, because it's their job. Federal judge has the right to rule on such cases, especially when it relates to genocide and possessions that were confiscated as a result of genocide or genocide-related crimes. So this appeals court judgment was even stranger, because on one hand, the judges ruled, they acknowledged that there was genocide. So once we had a problem with that before in some other courts, but this one, the judge said yes, it was genocide, and in my article I quoted verbatim what the judge wrote in his decision on behalf of the whole group of judges. But so on one hand he says genocide, then on the other hand the judge turns around and contradicts himself and says that the crime against Armenians happened a long time ago. Armenians are too late to file their lawsuits. They can't file a lawsuit 100 years later or 90 years later when they first filed it. So now the viewers must understand that there's something special about genocide. The special thing is that the Genocide Convention says that genocide does not have a statute of limitation. That means that when there's a genocide, people can file 50, 100, 500 years later, it's still a valid case. There's no limit to when somebody can file on a genocide-related crime. So I don't know how the judge, or the judges, the peace court judges, on one hand, they acknowledge the genocide, and on the other hand, they say you can't sue because time has passed, which I pointed in my article. Now, the only thing left to do for the lawyers for these two lawsuits that lost this round is to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court and bring this contradiction to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court, I'm not very positive that the Supreme Court will make a better decision in our favor, because they also will probably have the same concern about interfering in foreign policy, even though it's their right. The judiciary is a separate branch of the government from the executive, and they have the right to give their legal judgment, which they seem to be very reluctant. But in the Holocaust cases, they don't seem to be reluctant. They've gone after museums, the German government. They have all sorts of German, Swiss, and other countries who have stolen Jewish art. So, of course, in this case, it's not a particular piece of art. It's land, which I guess makes it more touchy and more sensitive for the judges.
So Supreme Court, that would be a long process, isn't it?
Well, the other thing, thank you for reminding me, the other thing I forgot to say, that the Supreme Court only picks very rarely cases referred to it. So we may not even, the Supreme Court may even turn down dealing with this case.
Yeah.
Not making any decision, yes or no. They must say, oh, this is not a constitutional issue and we don't need to get involved in it, and it sends back to the appeals court. Yeah. So we have two obstacles. One, will we be lucky enough that the Supreme Court will pick this case to pronounce judgment on? And secondly, if they pick it, which is very slim chance of picking, if they're going to say yes, that Armenians have a case and their demand is legitimate.
What role Turkish lobby play in this?
Well, the Turkish lobby has played a major role for years by constantly saying that there's no such thing as genocide, it's a lie, there was civil war, both sides killed each other, millions of Turks were killed by Armenians. So they managed either to convince people that this was a lie, or there's a more refined objective the Turks have, much more clever. They just raise questions about whether the genocide is true or not. So when they raise questions, then the judges, historians, scholars, politicians are reluctant to get involved in they call it a controversial subject. The Turks have managed to make this a controversy, and we have fought it tooth and nail for years to make sure that there's nothing controversial about this, that there are eyewitnesses, there are diplomatic documents on this documenting the genocide, and many countries have recognized, the UN has recognized it, the European Parliament has recognized it several times. President Reagan has recognized it in 1981. The U.S. Congress in 1975 and 1984 twice has recognized the genocide as genocide. And lastly, all the way back in 1951, the U.S. government sent a document to the World Court, International Court of Justice, saying that the Armenian genocide is one of the genocides in history, along with the Jewish Holocaust. So all the way back in 1951, already the U.S. government officially in an official document sent to the World Court, has recognized it was genocide. All these things have to be explained very clearly and simply to these judges. And I hope when it goes to the Supreme Court and they take the case, that our lawyers will be able to explain this. Because sometimes our lawyers don't know these things. And if you're not very educated on this, I spent my lifetime on this subject. I've gone around 25 countries lecturing on the U.S. recognition and world recognition of genocide. So that's the issue, that we have to prove that the genocide recognized, because we don't want to go back to the Supreme Court questioning whether it was genocide or not.
Can they bring people like you in the court to talk about it?
Well, they can if they want as expert witnesses, but it's not just me. They can bring Professor Richard Ovanesian, who's an expert historian.
But yeah, I give an example,
Yeah, unfortunately, we just lost Professor Bahar Dadrian, who was a preeminent expert on the Armenian genocide. But we have Professor Ovanesian, and we have other young historians they can bring. And I don't want to just blow my own horn. It's up to the lawyers to bring whoever they want.
Yeah. This Assyrian, they had this memorial event in Hollywood, North Hollywood. I had some short interview with the Hellenic president, chairman, James, his name. So I sort of lectured them. And I said, why you Armenians and Greeks and Assyrian are constantly concentrating on Congress, yet Turkey, they just totally ignore Congress. They concentrate on the executive part of government. They are Pentagon, they are in CIA, they are in FBI, they are in executive offices. Why can't you start switching a little bit to the executive part of the United States government instead of Congress? Congress, look, whether you like Trump or you don't like, but people like Trump do things. He's the president. He decided, I'm going to move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. He did. Whatever. He took Golan, the height of Syria, give it to Israel. But the executive part of the government of the United States, they could make decisions. But Congress decision is very slow. You're dealing with 500 people. It's not time. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, the reason the Turks are focusing more on the executive branch for a couple of reasons. I'm reading their mind now. One is that there are few people to focus on in executive branch than in the Congress. Congress is composed, as you know, of 535 members in the House and the Senate. So it's a lot of work to go and convince each one. And it's also a lot of work for us, of course. But the Turks, they have multi-million-dollar paid lobbyists in Washington. Many of them worked formerly as congressmen or senators or worked for the executive branch. And now they make millions from the Turkey. And they lobby the contacts in the executive branch. That's one reason. The other reason is that in the State Department, National Security Council, there are still people working there left over from the Cold War. We call them Cold Warriors. And they still believe in Turkey is a barrier, against Russia. It used to be against Soviet Union. And they're still in the Cold War mentality. They're fighting the Cold War. And we know John Bolton is one of them. And there are many others in various corners of the State Department left over. Of course, they're getting old. And I don't know if the new career officers in the State Department are any better or not. But so these people already are pro-Turkish without even the lobbying. So Turkey has the biggest lobby for Turkey. That's the executive branch.
Yes.
House and the State Department, Defense Department. Defense Department wants to sell weapons. look, recently when Turkey wanted to buy the Russian S-400 missiles, Obama was having Trump was having a heart attack over trying to prevent the Turks from buying the Russian missiles, and Trump was told that he has to cancel the F-35, the most advanced modern jets in the U.S. Air Force, to be sold to Turkey, because they will give their secrets to the Russians. And Trump was very reluctant. It took a lot of effort. He kept saying, because Trump constantly talks about money, 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 oh, we're going to make money from the sale. We're losing money. And Turks had paid $1 billion to purchase 116 F-35 jets. So Turkey already has a ready-made lobbying in Washington, which is the State Department, Defense Department, and the White House. And we don't seem to be able to break through that. We're able to do a pretty good job, our lobbying organizations do a pretty good job in the House and the Senate.
Yeah.
More in the House than the Senate. And, both parties, Democrats and Republicans. But we're not able to really, every president who's come and given a promise when they were a candidate to recognize genocide, that later on they withdrew their promise, except Reagan in 1981. He signed the presidential proclamation saying Armenian genocide. He's the only one.
It's really not as much as the president of the United States, because every time a president wants to recognize, you could see all those State Department, all the state, the Secretary of State and the Pentagon and the CIA, they just come rushing to the president saying, you don't do this, Turkey is important, blah. So we need to penetrate, Armenia. I'm gonna put that in next week, my conversation. There is more Greek, there is more Assyrian, there is more Armenian in America than there is Turks. But yet Turks, they have more influence on American government than those guys. Because I think they have to change their strategy, forget about the Congress. I'm not saying forget 100%, but forget too much on Congress, focus on the executive branch, and try slowly, surely infiltrate into it. Because president could do anything they want. The Congress, it's a bureaucracy, it's lots of people. Really, the president always can go overhead of the Congress, But I don't know. I hope some people listening and they change their strategy.
Let me say two things in response. One is that the issue is not how many Turks there are in the United States and how many Armenians, because it's not the Turks in the United States that are doing the lobbying. There's some small amount of letter writers and activists and organizations, but the big gorilla, the real power, resides with the Turkish government, which is a NATO member, a powerful country, and has a lot of friends in the executive branch, Defense Department, State Department.
Right.
You also reminded me something that I haven't talked publicly about. Back when President Clinton was president in the White House, I had a rare opportunity. They invited me to the White House. I was the only Armenian there. There were 5 other non-Armenian American businessmen there. So I had an hour or so with President Clinton and Vice President Gore. Both of them were there, which is rare that you meet with both of them at the same time. And President Clinton asked me, when my turn came to speak, he said, "What's on your mind?" And I said, "Well, I want to talk to you about the U.S. government recognizing the Armenian genocide." And I said, "I'm not blaming you, Mr. President. My guess is that you know that it was a real genocide, and every time you get ready to sign a declaration on the genocide, you have your Secretary of State, you have your National Security Advisor coming to you and say, 'Oh no, please don't do that. You will upset the Turks, and it will ruin our strategic alliance with Turkey in that part of the world.'" And so I stopped, and Clinton, surprisingly, said, Mr. Sassounian, you're exactly correct. That's exactly what happens. There's no question in my mind, Clinton said, that it was genocide. But you're right. I'm so glad you understand my situation. Every time I'm getting ready to say genocide, my top advisors tell me, no, don't say it. You will create problems for us.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what you said, which reminds me of my conversation with the president. So we don't need to speculate this. The president himself is saying it.
Yeah. It's right. Honestly, Armenians should switch the gear, try the best they can to start penetrating the executive branch, and whatever they do, I'm sure we have good people, ANC and Armenian Assembly, they are in there. And so, look, those people, ANC and Assembly, they were able to 49 states of United States. Those are American legislators. Those are the people recognized they are from the homeland, of America. So we have that. There's only one state, I don't know which state, Mississippi or whoever is left, not recognizing Armenian genocide. So if we could do that, we have more than 100 congressmen and women recognizing Armenian genocide. But it's time using maybe the Congress to lobby the executive branch. Without it, and also, I think both Armenian, Assyrian, and Greek should set up some committees, separate committees. For example, they could set up one committee. Their job is boycotting Turkey, and they could do it. They could start with Greek, Bulgaria, Iraq, Syria, with the people, not the government, because governments are not going to do it. So they could do lots, slowly but surely. They could do that because Turkey only understands the boycott. Remember, Russian boycott Turkey, 6 months, Turkish economy collapse. So if Armenian, Greek, Assyrian, because Armenian and Assyrian, they just signed a memorandum that they're going to work together, but they have to just pick the best of brightest of their people, create a committee, all three of them work together in different committees. But as I mentioned, one of them could be a boycott. Like I'm repeating this stuff when I talked to Hellenic president. I said, while right now we're here talking, if you go Los Angeles airport, there is Greek, Assyrian, Armenian, and Turkish airline flying. Can we just stop that one? But so that's our hard work. But I'm sure Armenian could do it.
Well, I mean, before we get too carried away with recognition of genocide, as I must have told you before, I have a whole different strategy in the way we do this. My position has been for many years that the Armenian genocide is already recognized by the U.S. government many times and at the highest levels. We have the president, we have the Congress, we have the entire U.S. government submitting to the World Court the official document. So how many more recognitions do we want? How many times they have to say yes to the same thing? You don't see the Jewish community going to Congress asking them to recognize the Holocaust. The issue is not recognition or acknowledgement. The issue is there's a confusion. Armenians get confused. They confuse recognition of genocide with foreign policy. And the reason the President of the United States, since Reagan, all the presidents, the two Bushes, Clinton, Obama, and now Trump, the reason they're reluctant, because they don't want to have this issue affect their maneuvers in foreign policy with Turkey. So they're not saying the genocide did not take place. They know it took place, like Clinton admitted that it took place. They just don't want to bring it up and use the word not to antagonize the Turks. And so this is a foreign policy decision rather than a historical truth, whether it's true or not. Everybody acknowledges truth. I mean, if the Turks would be honest, even they, of course, recognize they committed genocide because they're the ones who did it. They know better than anybody else. We're the victims, but they're the ones who committed it. So there's no issue. I mean, how many hundreds of years we're going to fight saying, please say genocide one more time, again and again. This president, this Congress, this senator, this governor, enough is enough. We have enough recognition. The real issue that Armenians should fight, and this is the job of the Armenian government, and that's another problem we'll discuss in detail a little later if you want, is Armenian government has to go to the World Court and sue Turkey and asking for restitution, compensation on the damages Armenians suffered from the genocide. Not whether it was a genocide or not. It was genocide, and it's proven. And Armenian government has been very reluctant to do this. I remember several years ago, about 5 years ago, the president of Armenia, Serge Sarkisian, set up a committee, and he put the head of the committee, the Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court of Armenia, Harut Sassounian, and they formed a committee of various international lawyers in Armenia, and they said they were studying the documents to see what the issues are and how to present it to which court. There are various courts. There are 3 types of courts. Most people are not aware of this. There are national courts in different countries. Then there is the International Court, which is the World Court. Then there's the European Court of Human Rights. The national courts, the U.S. government is the United States is the only country where you can file a group lawsuit on behalf of a class, called class lawsuit, rather than just on an individual basis. Whereas in Europe, other countries, most of them, if not all of them, don't have class lawsuits. So you can't do that in Europe. But in Europe, there's a European Court of Human Rights where any Armenian from any country, including Armenia and the United States, can file a lawsuit in Strasbourg against Turkey because Turkey is a member of the Council of Europe and they're subject to European Court of Human Rights and they're obligated to comply with its judgments. And the only lawsuit so far is the lawsuit, as we all know, filed by Aram Katolikos, and he asked for the headquarters of the Katolikosate in Sis in Turkey back, and that lawsuit was terminated because it was not applied properly. The European Court said that in order to apply to the European Court, first you have to sue Turkey in a lower court. Then, if they say no, you appeal it to the Supreme Court of Turkey, or the Constitutional Court of Turkey, and then if they say no, then you go to the European Court. But Aram Katolikos, for some reason, did not apply to the lower court in Turkey, went straight to the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court said no, so he came direct to the European Court of Human Rights. So that's why now my understanding is that Aram Katolikos is amending his lawsuit. Now he's starting from scratch. He's going to the lower court in Turkey, and then from there to Constitutional Court, then to European Court, and we'll see what happens there. But Armenians have to, we've done enough effort. There was a time when we needed to do this effort. I spent years lobbying at the United Nations in Geneva on human rights to recognize the genocide, and ANC lobbied in the European Parliament, and a lot of countries. We have close to 30 countries now recognize it. We have European Parliament, we have the UN, we have international scholars who as a group have recognized it. We have many historians, many books, movies, documents. So I think it's enough, we've done enough to prove that the genocide is correct. Even in this lawsuit that we start talking about, Judge Horowitz, in his decision, he says, we acknowledge the genocide. And he gives the details of how the Turks killed 1.5 million Armenians and deported them. They died in the desert. So I think we need to focus now, because if we're not, if we don't change our focus from genocide to restitution and compensation, we're playing in the hands of the Turkish government's objective. The Turks' objective is, they know that Armenians have, we always, for years, we used to say Armenians have 3 demands. And they all start with R. Recognition,
restitution,
and return of the lands. 3 R's. So the Turks have heard this from Armenians for many years. They memorized it. It's in their brain. So they know Armenians first, they want recognition. So if they say no, there's no recognition, Armenians will stop there and not go to the 2nd R and the 3rd R. So we should not fall for this Turkish game. We should say, okay, recognition, it's recognized, but even if you don't accept it's recognized, let's go to court and ask for restitution. To make it very simple to people who are not, international lawyers, this is like, if somebody commits a crime, they take him to court. The judge does not say to that person, we cannot judge you, we cannot punish you until first you admit your guilt. You acknowledge that you committed a crime. No. Most criminals, they plead innocent. Some of them plead guilty, but most of them plead innocent, and it's up to the court to prove that you're guilty. What we're doing is the opposite of what normally is done in any court, in any case. We're waiting for the Turks to say, yes, we've done it. Only then we're going to go. That's why we have restitution second. That's something wrong with our plan. It's not recognition first, then restitution, then demand of lands. It's recognition is done deal. We should move on to restitution and demand our lands. And that's what this lawsuit was demanding, lands. But got screwed up because of this judge's confusion on the genocide not having its statute of limitation. So in world court, so let's come back to the 2 courts we have and the opportunities we have. In the world court, only governments can file a lawsuit. Communities, individuals, organizations cannot file a lawsuit in the world court. Only governments. So we have the Armenian government. Now we have a Republic of Armenia, which we didn't have for a long time. So Armenian government should get its act straight, and instead of constantly pushing recognition like we are in the diaspora, they should form a committee of experts like they did before. And when I go to Armenia, I'll try to find out what happened to the last committee of experts. Of course, when the government changed, everything got dropped. So we have to start from scratch maybe, or they can continue where they left off. So for the World Court, we only can use the government of Armenia. There's no other choice. Now, as I said, for the European Court of Human Rights, we have much bigger chances. Any individual can apply there and file a lawsuit against Turkey for their houses, for their lands, for schools, orphanages, for their bank accounts, for their jewels left in safe deposit boxes before the genocide. So Armenia should start filing lawsuits. Now, I say this, but let me caution everybody that this is a very serious thing, and this is a much different thing than getting up on April 24 and marching in front of the Turkish consulate and demonstrating. That doesn't take much preparation or much knowledge. When you're filing a lawsuit against the government of Turkey, which has top-notch lawyers working for the government, you need to have expert lawyers to prepare the grounds for the lawsuit and to see how they present the lawsuit and to which court has the best chance of agreeing. Because if you just go with a lawyer who only knows to file for car accidents or theft and not a top-notch international lawyer, you're going to lose, not because there was no genocide, that's because you couldn't present it properly according to the rules of the court. And then once you lose, you're not the one that just lost the lawsuit. The whole Armenian nation loses their most important case. And because the Turks are very clever, once there's a judgment like that against Armenians, the Turks will go around the world, they publicize worldwide, they'll pay historians to write books on this, lawyers to write books, and say, you see, the church will say, you see, we told the whole world that there was no genocide. Now, the World Court or the European Court of Human Rights is saying there was no genocide. So Armenians were lying to you. So we can't allow this to happen. So individual Armenians should not just rush on their own and file such lawsuits. Very serious.
But like, you write lots of stuff, you educate lots of people, but who are in charge of this?
Well, you know, who's in charge? First of all, the Armenian government is in charge.
No, but in diaspora.
In the diaspora, we have organizations, we have political parties that defend the cause. And recently, the Tashnak Party, or the ARF, formed a committee for, I forgot the full name of the Committee for Justice for the Genocide, and they have experts group. And I haven't recently followed where they've reached, you know, in their preparations. But there are people. But whoever does it has to do it very carefully and with a lot of preparation with experts. I'm not the expert. I know a lot about the subject, but I'm not an international lawyer. So they need top-notch international lawyers, Armenian or maybe non-Armenians, for which we have to pay.
It's just like, we just don't know. But we know that, for example, we have ANC, they work very hard in Washington, Armenian Assembly, but we really don't know their policies and philosophies and what is we're getting. We know, like, there are good people like you write those things, educate the public, but who is listening? Who is taking direction? I mean, you just said Tajnal Sagan are doing, but Tajnal Sagan have been doing it for last 100-year stuff, you know. But when you go to Armenia, I assume you're gonna meet Pashinyan. Would you tell him that?
Yeah, I have no problem telling him that. I've discussed that with the previous presidents. But Pashinyan is the new leader, and I think we need to hear from him. And I have no problem asking him his position. Probably being new in government, he may not have given much thought about this, but I will raise it with him and see what he says. And if he allows me to make it public, I will write about it.
Well, I mean, I agree with you. Lots of things, even though Armenia is a small country, but government is government. Even when they go United Nations, they stand on that podium. People hear it. But not too many of them have done any of that stuff.
Well, the other government that you know, is with us, you mentioned the Greeks. Unfortunately, the Syrians don't have a country, but Greeks do have a country, and it's in some ways a little larger than Armenia. It's a member of NATO and member of the European
Union.
The European Union, so they have much more power and clout internationally, and they have done not very much in pursuing their genocide, the genocide, not Armenian, but the Greek genocide.
Yeah, they've done nothing.
They can file a lawsuit in war against Turkey. If I'm not mistaken, recently I read that they filed a lawsuit against Germany for
yes.
Greeks that were killed by the Germans during World War II. So they can also file a lawsuit, and they also may have international lawyers.
This is why, you know, when I was talking to the Hellenic chairman, and I said, Greek, Armenian, they have to set up different committees, because Armenian alone cannot do it, Greek alone cannot do it, the Syrian alone cannot do it. They all have the same cause, same enemy, and so hopefully now they're talking to each other. They might come out with something, you know.
Well, we need committee of experts.
Yes.
before we have just a committee of people,
Right.
experts, international law experts, and historians with them, and they can consult various other experts. They can consult archives of many countries where there are documents. And the good news is that all three Armenian political parties in the diaspora, they all have the same objective. So they all say the same thing I'm saying. I'm not saying anything different. They all believe that we need to recover historic Armenian lands and have Western Armenia as part of Armenia. And we have, we have a slogan, free and united Armenia.
Yeah.
And so, fortunately, we have no dispute among ourselves whether we want this or not. Panchaks want it, Ramgabars want it, Tashnaks want it, they all want, and all Armenians want it, which is people also want it, not just the parties. So it's a matter of organizing ourselves.
That's what is missing, organization.
Yeah. And pursuing this in an international court in a very serious manner with experts, and have the Armenian government also with us, because diaspora and Armenia have to join hands in this. Armenia shouldn't do this alone on their own, and diaspora shouldn't do this alone. We should join hands, and maybe one can play the advisory role to the other, whatever it is. If it's a world court, then diaspora can't do it, Armenia can do it, but the diaspora experts can join them and give advice to them.
Well, because each has his own strength. The diaspora has access to the governments they live outside, and also Armenia, it's a government has their voice in everywhere, and so it works, but you need some people to bring all these people together.
I agree. It's you see the one of the things I wrote in my article in the appeals court, the federal judge is saying this is not timely, even though legally he's wrong because it's genocide, but there's a concept in law. For example, if somebody comes and robs my house and I know that he robbed it, I can't just wait 50 years later go to the police and say, oh, so-and-so robbed my house. The policeman's going to tell you, where were you for the last 50 years? You knew that he robbed it. You knew you were robbed. Why didn't you come to us 50 years later? That's why there's a statute of limitation. So people don't come decades later and try to pursue. The more you don't pursue your demands, your lands, your properties, your money, your jewelry, your buildings, the more you give up your rights.
I think we have to move from talking to action. Exactly. Armenian, Assyrian, and Greek united, and so in many level, many strategy, boycotting, lobbying, and Armenian government, Greek government, as you said, Assyrian don't have, but they still have some leverages. So it could be done, but it just need organization.
Right.
And you have to push them.
Well, I'm one man. I push as much as I can, but it would be better if everybody pushes.
Well, we're making those noises. Hopefully they hear it. Sometimes when I interview them, I throw these things at them, and so we're gonna pump them, and hopefully something could happen, because we're spending too much going and demonstrating in front of Turkish embassy. I mean, imagine those 160,000 Armenian. If everybody, instead of marching, they give $5, imagine how much money we could have. Just $5. Don't march. Just pay $5 to this cause, to have to hire lawyers, to hire lawyer outside Armenian lawyers. Things like that, marketing, but we just talk about genocide. It's nothing gonna happen with genocide. But it is cause we need always to remember, we need to talk about it, but we need action. Time for action.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. The difficulty I have with my people, I love my people, but too often they talk a lot and do very little. And the ones who do the least talk the most. So it's long past the time for action. We don't need any more talk. We talked enough. We have enough documents, enough proof.
Yeah.
Unless you go to court and file a lawsuit in an intelligent manner, people are just gonna ignore your speeches. You can give a speech every day. I can write a column every day, every hour, but there's no consequence to this. But if you go to court and the judge says, rule something, there's a consequence to it. You can then take it to the Security Council, to the UN. The World Court decision is enforced by the Security Council. They can have punitive measures against Turkey. They can have a blockade of trade, all sorts of things that they could do. And the most important thing, besides the lawsuit, there's another important thing, as I always mention in my lectures. It's very important that every Armenian should educate the next generation of our demands, because we know all these things, but once we're no longer here and we have not passed on the torch to the next generation, it dies with us, our demands. And I give a very simple example. For example, if let's say 50, 100 years from now, we have a president in Turkey who's an absolute angel, let's say, for example, angel, and he wants to do the right thing. He studies the documents and he comes to the conclusion that yes, Turkey did terrible things to Armenians and they need to pay amends. They need to compensate. So the Turkish president, who's an angel, this is just an example. It might not be realistic, but you never know what happens in decades or 100 years from now.
Yeah.
And, you know, we had an example like this, we almost had an example like this already 30 years ago. Turkey had a president called Turgut Özal. And Turgut Özal told his advisors, I would like to sit down with Armenians and to see how we can recognize this genocide and see what is it that they want from the recognition. And his advisors told him, no, you're going to start a big problem in Turkey. There'll be riots in Turkey against you if you go that road. Don't do it. So they talked him out of it. So,
well, that's why they poisoned them. They killed them.
Yeah. So we came very close.
Yeah.
And in fact, this is another thing that our people don't know about, and I have collected all the documents to write a book about. In 1989, I think it was, the Turkish foreign minister called a meeting with the heads of 3 Armenian political parties. So they met in Zurich.
Yeah.
They discussed what, and the foreign minister asked Armenians, "What is it you want from us?" And the Armenian political party said, "We want our lands back." And the Turkish government said, "No, we can't give you any lands." And the meeting was over. It was a one-day meeting. They agreed to meet again. It didn't happen. They didn't meet again. But anyway, going back to my example, if 100 years from now, an Turkish president who's an angel comes to power and says, I studied everything, Armenians are right, we did terrible things to them, now I'm willing to give Van, Erzurum, and Garin back to Armenians, let's say. What else can you ask? This is a miracle. But if we're not careful, this is what will happen. And this will be our fault. If we don't educate our children about our demands, and they don't educate their children and their children. Remember, the Jews, for 2,000 years, they said, next year in Jerusalem. And finally, 1948 came, and there was an opportunity they took advantage of.
Yeah.
60 generations later, the 60th generation did not forget what the first generation was saying.
Yeah.
Next year in Jerusalem. They remembered.
Well,
they fought for it.
Well, even as who would think the Soviet Union will collapse 30 years ago, we'll have Armenia, or we will be able to liberate Artsakh. Things happen without you even imagining, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I answer to people who say, Mr. Sassounian, you're not realistic. How can you get land from Turkey? I tell them, no. I studied international politics. I'm very realistic. One thing I know that these people forget, that no country has kept the same boundaries from the beginning of time to now.
Yeah.
Countries have enlarged, got smaller, completely disappeared. Also, things happen in time, over thousands of years. You never know what happens. No one can say that you can never get land. Never means never forever.
Remember, we had a discussion. I think, I don't know which one, when you were on. I said, why can't we go talk to Erdogan? Because he's a dictator. He could do anything he wants. You know, people were laughing at me. I said, hey, you never know. Those dictators, like, they do things and they have followers. They could justify it, but whether he does or not, but it's at least you try it.
Well, I don't know, but even talking to Erdogan, you need to. Armenians shouldn't just get up and run to Ankara and start talking to Erdogan.
No, of course not.
It could be official people,
Yes.
Prime Minister of Armenia, President of Armenia, Prime Minister of Armenia, experts who should come. Also, we need to have some indication from Turkey that they're willing to have some kind of a reasonable discussion, trying to make some accommodation, some compromise on our demands. We may not get everything we want, but the Turks have to have an indication. So far, they said, we don't owe you a grain of sand.
Yeah, but I remember, Garo Palin was trying sort of underground, creating some communication between Armenia and Turkey, but I don't know if that's still going on or it was just a wind came and gone.
Nothing's going on. The Armenia and Turkey, they signed the Armenia-Turkey protocols 10 years ago, and that didn't go anywhere. It was never ratified by the Turkish parliament. So at this point, from everything I know, and I follow Turkey like a hawk day and night, the Turks are not in a position to sit down and negotiate with Armenians and compromise on anything, giving us anything. They say, we don't owe you a grain of sand. Some Armenians are foolish enough to say, oh, all we want is just Mount Ararat, they can have the rest. But I tell them, well, why do you give up already without even sitting to negotiate 99% of what is yours, and you just want Ararat? No one's giving you Ararat anyway, so you might as well ask for everything. Armenia from sea to shining sea, not just Ararat, because no one's giving it to you, so don't minimize your demands. Stick to a maximum and see what you get from it, because if you start from the minimum, then you get nothing or even less than nothing.
This is so informed, so great conversation. We could go on all night, but we have only 2 minutes left. Whatever you want to say, we'll close it. Maybe we'll continue this every week. You know, we have to do this.
Well, I'll be happy to. So just to finish my other thought is we have to educate our next generations so that when the Turkish government one day says, okay, come and get it, our children don't say, what is Van? They never heard of Van. They've never heard of Erzurum. They've never heard of Gesaria. So we need to pass this message on. So we need to say for the next several generations, next year in Van, just like next year in Jerusalem, next year in Van. And so one day when the opportunity comes somehow to regain what we lost, we have the knowledge and we have the commitment to get back what belongs to us and not lose it because we have no idea what they're talking about.
Actually, there is this book the guy gave me. He wrote this 100 Armenian. He's a war songwriter. He's a great guy. In fact, I was told by some people who were in Karabakh, he says his songs helped liberation of Karabakh. So he always says this, Mir inch, I forgot in Armenian, Mir Sassouni, Mir Peter Tank, something like that, you know. So they're keeping all this song stuff in life. And tomorrow, 9 o'clock, we have one of those guy, a young, handsome, a new appointed executive director, Armenian Sahagian. He will be on. We'll ask him, see what is those new young generation is doing. So Armenians are not short of those young. And Harut, thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate that. Please hang in there. Don't go away. Let me finish this show. So please tune in tomorrow at 9 a.m. with Armenian Sahagian. He's amazing guy. You have to meet them. You have to talk to him. So we'll see you tomorrow at 9 in the morning.
He's the executive director of the ANC Western region.
Right.
Thank you.